Sit tight, my friends, as I weave a tale of magic and fright. Let the fire burn low and let the wind howl through the ridges of this lake as the muses sign on to me and the night speaks with my voice. There was once a young man who lived, worked, slept, and ate along the ridge of a great dark lake, Devil's Lake, in which he fished and drank. He was a wild man in harmony with nature, loving all things in nature, alive or otherwise. But nature was not in harmony with him. This man lived in peace with the world for many years, each day and night the same as the last. But one night was different. The day was normal for the man, but as the sun set, just as it had for millennia before, the night settled in, and the wind whispered through the trees. All was at peace, for a time. And the moon rose, a bright eye high above the earth. But the moon, this night, was different. It glowed orange. The young man sat high up on the cliff upon Devil's Lake and watched with trepidation as this new moon rose. He knew the orange moon was an actual occurrence, but this was not an actual day. This day was Hallows Eve, when the veil between this world and the next was thinnest. The ominous moon bearing down on him did not ease his fear. The moon appeared to have a face, and it watched, and waited. The tall ridge of stone over the lake seemed to glow with the light of the moon, sparkling like a sheet of frosted glass. The ground below the man trembled slightly. Something was coming, he knew, but he did not know what, and for the first time in his life, he was truly, truly afraid. The lake below shimmered, still as the sky above, and placidly reflected the trees around it. But there was a ripple in still water, and something below the lake moved. The reflection of the trees and the moon far overhead broke into shards of glass, and the wind stopped humming. Everything was silent as the water broke. Impossibly slowly, something appeared to be rising out of the water. The lake rippled as this new operation, slow as ice, stretched its way higher and higher into this world. What undulated out of the water was, at first, nothing but a single tentacle, sharpened into a spear at its tip. It was red like fire and splotted with dark blotches of night. It wiggled slowly, quietly, almost unnoticeably as it slid between worlds. It shimmered in the moonlight, but there was some unmistakably offset quality about it, something not quite of this world, and it most certainly was not. The man quaked, weighting this monster carefully. He had never seen anything like this before, but this was Hallows Eve. He prepared himself for what else might appear above the water, fastening himself in a protective leather suit and wielding a heavy stone axe. But even with this weapon, a feeling of deep dread settled into the pit of his stomach, and he waited. Eventually, after what felt like weeks, the young man saw something more substantial than a tentacle float out of the water. It was, at first, nothing more than a red lump, as it was the base of the tentacle. The base, too, was covered in patches of nothing. Then the mass grew, and the space itself seemed to spread apart to create a void for the beast to pass through. The young man saw this creature rise out of the water, and saw that it had 10,000 eyes. These eyes were intelligent, large, and a deep yellow. They had slits like those of a cat's, but these slits were far deeper, and showed a way into unimaginable horror. They darted around, watching everything, especially the young man. The 10,000 eyes circled the great monster's head, and observed all, learning how best it could be destroyed. Then came the smell. A scent like rotting fruit and decaying flesh that reached down into the throat, causing anyone to gag and taste something awful, something sulfuric, ancient, and evil. The appearance of this devilish creature stopped the man cold in his tracks. He could feel a very real pressure in the air, like something was building, something was growing. And suddenly, there was a cacophony like metal scraping on metal, and it poured from the spot broken in space within the lake, a sound like 100 billion screams of torment and anguish. It was as if hell itself outpoured the very noise within it. The beast climbed higher and higher into the air, underneath the light of this orange moon, hauling more of its horrendous body out of that other world and into this plane. And now the man could see all of it, not just a tentacle. The rest of its body appeared to be decaying, and rotted flesh fell off of its bones, if they could even be called that. But what was on the skin was far, far worse. The man thought he could see human faces shift and form upon the beast's skin, and then disappear into nothing. What appeared to be mouths rings with sharp, poisonous teeth, also moved freely upon the abomination's skin. This man also thought he could see other, more horrible things, but he was not certain. The man felt a crushing fear in his chest, the kind of terror that only comes with the brush with death. Finally, after what the young man felt must have been years, the fiend reached its apex of its flight and shuddered, and the air, the very fabric of reality, seemed to shudder with it. The moon was at the very tip of its climb as well, and now began to descend, and the monster lowered with it, as if tied to the celestial body. The young man watched and breathed this with a sigh of relief, seeing that he was not in any danger now. The worst was over. So he thought. The single tentacle of the brute, the one that had first broken the surface like shattering a mirror, felt the man's change of heart. Taking this last opportunity, for the split second the man let his guard down, this creature struck. It lashed out like a whip, stabbing the man through the chest with the expertise of a master marksman. The young man choked on blood as his eyes grew wide with horror, looking down to see a lava-red tentacle impaled through his chest. The man's blood splashed carelessly onto the rock cliff, poisoned by the creature's filthy skin. The tentacle relaxed and pulled out of the man's body. The young man fell to his knees as his life slipped away slowly, saturating the stones he sat upon. He gasped through the blood in his throat, and with his eyes watched the demonic atrocity as it slid, silent now, beneath the still waves of the lake. One of its great eyes flicked around one last time, terrible fury reflected within, but also a great mirth. It did not have the opportunity to fully realize itself into this world, but it was able to send something else in. The man died quietly, his last breaths gurgling in his own blood. Quietly, quieter than the grave, the beast sunk back into its lair, but in its last moments in the world above, it watched its handiwork come to life, and it laughed. It laughed a deep, evil laugh. The blood of its victim slowly began to gather in one spot, like a ghastly bubble. The gory mass of poisoned blood grew and swelled until it finally burst with a single definitive blast. The forceful pop released hundreds, perhaps thousands of small droplets of tainted blood into the night. A droplet landed near the man's glazed eyes and began to change. It was no longer blood, but now the same color as the leviathan that had birthed it. It swirled and spun upon its axis until it became solid and opened, revealing a single yellow eye. This happened over and over again, each and every droplet forming an eye. As the man's body finally ran cold, drained of blood, the droplets blinked as one, and slunk off into the darkness to find their next prey, and to wait. And nature watched, impassively, as the man's body slowly decomposed over many days, and the rocks and trees grew around him. He became part of the earth that he so loved, but the same cannot be said about his blood. That is a different story. It is said that, sometimes, on some nights when the moon is full, if one stands just in the right spot on the cliff at Devil's Lake, one can see a ripple when no wind has blown. The lake quivers as if something massive beneath its surface is waiting, watching, for an opportunity to surface, and on some Hallows Eve, when the orange moon coincides with that dreadful night, it is spoken that one can see a red tentacle rise from the water, to this very day, patiently awaiting a new chance to stretch out into this world. The times have not been right yet, but someday they will. It's only a matter of waiting, and it is always a matter of waiting. The blood and the beast are patient. The eyes are growing in number as they find more sources of nourishment. Just how many there are today is impossible to tell, and they're too small to ever be noticed, the size of a drop of blood, but more dangerous than any weapon. They may be in your house, and you would never know. They could be in your car, upon the crib, inside your body, and you would never know. They are out there, in the darkness. The young man died alone on the ridge, and the earth reclaimed his body as its own. No one has spoken of him since, but all this has been recorded faithfully by the omnipresent night, the watchers in the darkness. And all this I can tell you, but let it be a warning. The night does you no harm. Do not be afraid of the dark. Be afraid of what lurks within it.